Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the University of San Francisco. Thank you all so much for joining us for the inaugural Social Impact Summit brought to you by the Blockchain Law Center for Social Good and Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web. My name is Evîn Cheikosman, the director of the Blockchain Law for Social Good Center, where our fabulous team works to equip the next generation of lawyers and lawmakers with the knowledge and tools needed to successfully navigate the future of emerging technologies with a lens towards equity and justice. So just a few housekeeping notes to be aware of for today. This event is being live streamed for our virtual attendees, and most of the program, with exception to breakout sessions and lunch, will be recorded and photographed. You will see here on the screen that we have a QR code. You'll also see it on some of the play cards around the venue, which takes you to our official program, complete with speaker biographies, an agenda, and how to donate to the center so that we can continue to put up the caliber of events and programs that we've done here today. Now, today, you will be hearing from some of the world's foremost thought leaders from organizations such as the United Nations Development Program, Tech Congress, Starling Labs, Witness, and the California Department of Justice, to name but a few, who are renowned for their stewardship and leadership at the intersection of technology, policy, and digital rights. At a time of tremendous societal change and rapid technological progress, we hope that the discussions we will facilitate here today will support the expansion and further enrichment of your understanding of just how, with the right policies and design processes, artificial intelligence, blockchain, quantum, decentralized tools can really be a catalyst for positive social transformation. But of course, as we all know, technology is not without its own challenges. Appreciating the gravitas of both the risks and opportunities of emerging technologies, we've pulled together sessions that we hope will garner meaningful insights and both inspire and empower each of us in whatever industry or craft we contribute to continue reimagining and architecting innovative ways to better build stronger, inclusive, and more resilient communities. Now, in a moment, we will hear from our keynote speaker, Rainey Reitman, but before I pass over the mic, I wanted to just share a snapshot into her fabulous background. Rainey is the president of the board of directors at the Freedom of the Press Foundation. Prior to that, she worked for the Electronic Frontier Foundation for 11 years, first as their activism director and then as their chief program officer. Currently, she serves as a board member for Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web and runs a nonprofit consulting service called Groundwork Strategy. Rainey's advocacy has focused on defending the rights of whistleblowers, fighting mass government surveillance, and investigating how limiting access to financial services has been used to silence speakers. Now, I, of course, can go on and on about Rainey's incredible advocacy and leadership, but will surmise by saying that her insights are critical to grounding all of us in what truly matters with regards to how we all navigate our changing technological ecosystems. And that is the impact that our policies, our inventions, and our solutions will ultimately have on people, communities, and the planet that future generations will ultimately inherit. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rainey to the stage.
Hi, I'm going to do a really good job of not wandering away from this microphone because I'm a pacer when I speak. So if I start to meander, let me know. I'm Rainey, and I just want to start off by thanking the folks who put this fantastic event together, in particular Michelle, who runs the Blockchain Law for Social Good Center. I heard Michelle speak a a few years ago, and I was just blown away and immediately resonated with everything that she was saying. And I have been just thrilled to see the approach that this center has taken, the research and the education, bringing in lawmakers, trying to really think long term, I think is so important. And I am delighted to see how it has come together. And I'm also delighted by the organizers of this day's event. Thank you so much for doing such a good job and for all the hand-holding to make this happen. Yay, event organizers. So before I dig into it, I want to talk a little bit about the format of this speech. I've given many public talks over the years, and it is amazing that you can give a public talk and then immediately the people that you spoke to will be like, I don't super remember what you said, actually. And people will forget. They will forget names, they will forget laws, they will forget data, statistics. You can dig into the deep regulatory issues, and it will just flow by them like water. But what people remember so well is stories. It's just something very innate in humans, and it is how we have passed down so much of our culture and so much of our lives is through stories. And I've found that when I include stories, people are much more likely to take something away from a talk. So I have rather than just throw a bunch of facts at you, I've actually put together 3 different stories that I'm going to tell about centralization and decentralization. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I pull from each of those stories, but they are not meant to be, this is the one way to look at it. It is totally fine if you take something else out of it, and I'm actually looking forward to our time together today because I would love to hear if you have a different impression or a different takeaway. I think that's what makes an event like this so special, is that we have that opportunity to kind of go a level deeper and kind of analyze things on that level. So the first story I want to tell is about journalists who got very sick of very large PDFs. In 2009, there were 2 journalists from ProPublica named Scott Klein and Eric Umansky. And they teamed up with a journalist named Aaron Pilhofer from the New York Times. He was running the technology department of the New York Times at that moment. And they all faced a similar problem, and it's one faced by journalists all over the world at that time, which is that document sharing was just a little bit clunky. So investigative reporters often write by analyzing huge troves of documents. This is sort of the less exciting part of journalism. See, I'm wandering away. And it's just reading thousands and thousands of pages, looking for clues about what might be a good story. And this could be documents that they get through a public records request. Maybe they get it from a confidential source or a whistleblower, or maybe it's just something that they did through just going through and searching through corporate or public documents. And after they have done their analysis and written up their stories, what even happens to those documents, right? Where do they go? Where do they exist? And in 2009, the answer was like a PDF that's attached maybe to the article, I guess. So it wasn't like a really great experience for users. But what if it didn't have to be that way? Scott and Eric and Aaron wanted to make something better. And these 3 journalists imagined inventing a document storage system that would be designed for the very specific needs of journalists. So they dreamed up a new sort of document viewer that would beautifully display the source documents behind a news story so that readers who were reading it could go back and say, oh, is that my impression as well? Can I go back and see if I agree with how this article was written? And the hope was that it would also improve analysis in the sense that, a newspaper, they might have a trove of documents. They might write 1 article, maybe 2, but this would be like, okay, well, now the documents are available. Other journalists can go back and also do additional analysis and pull additional stories out of it. So Scott and Eric and Aaron built a new tool that they called DocumentCloud. And it allowed journalists to share documents with one another and with their editors before anything was published live. And it also let them add annotations, so they could leave a comment for their editor like, hey, look at this is what we think this means. And some annotations could be public, like, readers, if you're looking at this, this is the section we discussed in the article. And the best part was that once it was on DocumentCloud, it was going to stick around. We are in an era around online news where, unfortunately, a lot of news organizations are folding. And what happens to their websites long term? What happens to the articles that they publish, to the documents that they cite? Sometimes those articles and documents can just disappear with the news organization. With DocumentCloud, the hope is that they would stick around, that they would forever be on DocumentCloud. And then today, the DocumentCloud is used by 3,500 journalists all over the world. Organizations like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Wired, The Guardian, and so many others. And this technology has really benefited journalism, and through journalism, all of us. I want to just give one example so you get a sense of the type of thing that exists on DocumentCloud. So in February of 2015, a German newspaper was contacted by an anonymous whistleblower. He was a whistleblower who just called himself John Doe, and he said he couldn't even reveal his identity. He said, "My life is in danger. We will only ever chat over encrypted files. No meeting, ever." And that whistleblower had over 11 million documents that he or she had presumably taken from a Panamanian law firm. It was a company that provided corporate services to people who wanted offshore financial and business accounts. And these are the documents that came to be known as the Panama Papers. And these papers helped show companies and people were setting up shell companies not just to evade taxes, but also to commit like all sorts of other crimes. And if you haven't checked it out already, there is a completely lovely movie about this featuring Meryl Streep called The Laundromat, where they actually read a part of the letter that the whistleblower provided, where he talked about his reasons for why he put things out into the world, why he made this available. He said that the real reason was trying to shine a light on income inequality. And I'm just going to share what he said. He said, "Income inequality is one of the defining issues of our times. It affects all of us the world over. The debate over its sudden acceleration has raged for years, with politicians and academics and activists alike helpless to stop its steady growth despite countless speeches, statistical analyses, a few meager protests, the occasional documentary. Still the question remains why, and why now? The Panama Papers provide a compelling answer to these questions: massive, pervasive corruption." So DocumentCloud was the perfect place to host the Panama Papers because journalists could review and annotate the documents for analysis as they wrote articles, and then make the documents available online for other journalists. That's a lot of documents, so there was a lot to review. But it's also really important to notice that the Panama Papers had many sensitive things in them. For example, there were lots of photos of passports. You don't want to just publish all of this stuff to the open web because it could be used for identity theft or for other purposes. So DocumentCloud could also provide a way of hosting things, analyzing it, sharing it with journalists, but then choosing not to make everything public. And as always, the documents would stay online with DocumentCloud, even if something happened to that individual newspaper. Probably. Why do I say probably? Because I always wonder, well, what if it didn't, right? What if DocumentCloud went down or was somehow blocked? Because as awesome as this tool is, it's also a centralized service. And the nonprofit behind it, Muckrock, maintains DocumentCloud and pays for the servers that host all the DocumentCloud data. But what if something happened to Muckrock? So in 2019, there was a horrible terrorist attack in New Zealand. A man named Brendan Tarrant went to 2 different mosques in Christchurch, and he opened fire, killing 51 people. And there were a lot of articles that got written about what happened, including fantastic coverage of news organizations who provided really detailed analysis. One of the documents that was analyzed was Tarrant's manifesto, which was a 75-page document outlining why he did what he did. And scholars have analyzed it, and a lot of journalists reported on it. And the government of New Zealand and Australia, they both banned this manifesto because they were afraid that if people read it, it would spur more attacks. And Australia said to internet service providers, you need to block any site hosting a copy of that manifesto. But one journalist writing about the shooting had already uploaded the manifesto to DocumentCloud for analysis. And so every ISP in Australia blocked access to DocumentCloud. I want to make something very clear here. This isn't about this manifesto, which was a complicated topic, and I know that there are many divergent opinions about whether that document should be available to the public to analyze and read. But setting aside that question for a moment, we come to this. Of the millions of documents hosted by DocumentCloud, only one document, which had one distinct URL, was banned. And that's not what the ISPs blocked. They blocked all of DocumentCloud. So during this block, people using the internet in Australia couldn't get to any of the documents hosted by DocumentCloud, including the millions of vital documents of public importance, like the Panama Papers. And remember, 3,500 journalists worldwide are relying on DocumentCloud to store their source documents, and all of that was blocked. And in that moment, it became clear just how vulnerable DocumentCloud could be to censorship. And in this case, this journalist swiftly removed the manifesto, and eventually DocumentCloud was able to get the Australian government to stop blocking access to its site. But the lesson was really clear. It was the Australian government this time, but what would be the next government to block DocumentCloud? And if instead of blocking access to a controversial manifesto, what if a government tried to block access to a report about government corruption or an election scandal? Michael Morrissey, the executive director of Muckrock, reached out to me about this problem a couple years ago. He needed a way to ensure that the incredible archive of DocumentCloud, full of millions of historically significant documents, would stay available to the public. So the Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web worked with Muckrock to create new functionality on DocumentCloud. And today, any journalist who uploads a document to DocumentCloud also has the option to send a copy to Filecoin, a decentralized data storage system designed to be resilient. Filecoin is a Web3 project that is built for the long-term preservation of digital files, and it's decentralized. Even if the Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web disappeared tomorrow, even if Muckrock disappeared, the Filecoin network would continue to exist. So if in some future other world, if another government, maybe an authoritarian regime, tried to block access to DocumentCloud, journalists can know that their documents will still be accessible via Filecoin. And I truly hope that nothing ever happens to Muckrock, but I rest easier knowing that there is a decentralized data storage system that will ensure the long-term preservation of these vital documents. And that brings me to one of the key aspects of decentralizing technologies that I think sets them apart from their centralizing counterparts, which is resiliency. Robust decentralized projects are built to be resilient because there is no single point of failure that can cause the collapse of the entire network. And when it comes to something as vital as journalistic documents stored on DocumentCloud, that's really key. We need to have resiliency to ensure that these documents will still be available to the public and historians for future generations. Which now brings me to my second story, which is about a little town that had very lousy internet service. So there is a community in Oregon, just 90 minutes outside of Portland, called Marshland. It's right next to the Columbia River, and it's a community that's small enough that they had a post office for a while, but then they just closed it because I guess they didn't need it anymore. And the people living there have really struggled with internet service. The big ISPs don't want to build towers just to serve a few people, and they can't even put in fiber because they have to dig trenches into the embankments that are being used to hold back the river. So what do the people there do? Well, right now, they have to pay a huge amount of money for terrible internet. The cost for folks in Marshland is over $100 a month, and they have to pay some combination of satellite or cell phone services or cell service providers, and neither of those are very good options. And Marshland, Oregon is not the only community struggling with this issue. Often we don't think about how lousy and slow the internet in the United States is because we are used to it. We survive with low bandwidth options from maybe 1 or 2 internet service providers because we don't have much of a choice and because, frankly, we don't know any better. I learned a ton of this from Gigi Sohn when I was producing a podcast for EFF a couple years ago. And she explained to me that in a lot of other countries, like South Korea, the government invested in broadband in a major way, either because they considered it a public utility or they basically decided to treat it like a public utility. Or in places like England, they adopted policies that allowed for a ton of market competition, so consumers had a lot of choices. But here, in the United States, we don't have those things. The government didn't invest to build our internet services on a grand scale, and we don't have public policies that generate a ton of competition. We have neither, which means that our internet is just not great. So when the pandemic hit in 2020, I know it's dramatic, now everybody's awake. Everybody's like, I'm just enjoying this. No, you're with me now. So when the pandemic hit in 2020, all the problems with America's spotty and expensive internet services became super apparent. And so at home all day, often with multiple family members, using the same connection at the same time, we quickly saw people using more of their bandwidth. And this didn't happen in just one household, but in many households. And that's when the true breakdown of our internet services started to become more of a conversation. And for people who lived in communities like Marshland, Oregon, the problem is even worse. Communities, families, school children are suddenly on Zoom all day, and the internet wasn't even working that great before everybody was forced to be on Zoom all day. So the real solution here is a massive investment in public infrastructure and changing public policy to improve competition, period. That's what we actually need to do. But getting these reforms into place was going to take a few years and a lot of advocacy work. So I am delighted to see projects like Althea trying to find new ways to get internet to people right now, using decentralized technology. Althea uses physical antennas that they often just set up in people's individual homes, like in their yards, to try to send internet services to people who wouldn't otherwise get it. And there's a payment layer built on Ethereum so that people offering internet services to their neighbors can get paid automatically. And instead of paying a monthly fee for internet, regardless of how much you use or whether or not the service is available when you want it, Althea is a little bit more like a prepaid phone card. You pay for each gigabyte you use, and if you don't use it, it stays in your account. So in Marshland, Oregon, there's an Althea network that's active today. You can actually see it on a little map where they have antennas. It starts in a computer store at a nearby town, and then there's 8 little antennas that bring internet all the way to Marshland, Oregon. And the whole system costs, thousands of dollars to set up, not the hundreds of thousands of dollars that it would cost to set up a new cell phone tower or to trench for fiber. And the Althea project, to me, highlights another key aspect of decentralizing technologies, which is that regular people can become creators of and contributors to the network. This was one of the aspects that made the early era of the internet so exciting and revolutionary. There was a feeling that anyone could learn to code and start building something that could change the world. But the internet's movement towards centralization was also a move towards corporatization. So today, most of our digital experiences are mediated through a relationship with a giant internet company. And these are companies that have all the wrong incentives. They see people as products or as a resource to be used, and they are often trying to surveil our data or lock us out of competing services or try to find new ways to monetize our experiences. And the best decentralizing projects create more human experiences of technologies so people can actually contribute. And we see this reflected in communities like Wikimedia, in the larger free software movement, and in projects like Althea in Marshland, Oregon, where people are literally uniting to bring internet services to their neighbors. And then the last story I want to share with you, my third idea about decentralization, is about an award-winning journalist who faced a massive fight with the US government. The journalist is named James Risen. He was previously with the New York Times, and now he writes over for The Intercept. And he mostly writes about the national security state. So for years, Risen cultivated sources from within the top tiers of government agencies, including the CIA. And developing those contacts took years. It was a slow and difficult process. And he decided to exercise a lot of patience. And he wrote about this, and I want to share this quote from him. He said, "I started covering the CIA in 1995. The Cold War was over. the CIA was downsizing, and CIA officer Aldrich Ames had just been unmasked as a Russian spy. A whole generation of senior CIA officials was leaving Langley, and many wanted to talk. I was the first reporter many of them had ever met, and as they emerged from their insular lives at the CIA, they had little concept of what information would be considered newsworthy. So I decided to show more patience with sources than I ever had before. I had to learn to listen and let them talk about whatever interested them. So through Reisen's incredible patience over many years, he was able to uncover and report on important details about America's surveillance state and our war on terror. As just one example, he was the first reporter to reveal that the CIA was waterboarding terrorism suspects. He also revealed that the CIA had received information that Iraq had abandoned its efforts to develop weapons of mass destruction before the United States ever invaded Iraq. And as a result of this incredible patience of this journalist to cultivate sources and earn their trust, he was able to write informative articles for the New York Times, publish 4, I think actually now 5 incredible books, and win 2 Pulitzer Prizes. And he received a subpoena from the US government. Reisen was ordered to appear before a grand jury and report on the unnamed sources he used for his book State of War, in which he wrote about a botched US intelligence operation that was supposed to give fake nuclear blueprints to the Iranian government as a way to forestall their efforts to develop nuclear weapons, but actually was just a terrible operation, and anybody could figure out that these were fake blueprints. So he decided to publish that story 6 years after that failed operation. And he said a big part of the reason was that there had been so much public criticism of the New York Times and other papers that hadn't done enough to raise questions and concerns about the later debunked claims of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Newspapers had failed in their duty to question government officials then, and it had led to this terrible and prolonged war. He wasn't going to sit on a story of this much importance just as America was debating its role in Iran. So the US government wanted to go after the leaker who had told Reisen about this failed program, but Reisen refused to cooperate with the subpoena. And why? Because Reisen couldn't testify. If he turned over his sources, he'd be betraying the trust that he built over his entire career. How could he possibly continue to do his work as a journalist reporting on national security if his sources couldn't trust him? So from 2007 until 2014, first under the Bush administration, then under Obama, Reisen faced a legal battle to protect his sources. And then on the eve of Reisen's ultimate showdown in court, after harassing this award-winning journalist for 7 long years, the government suddenly pulled a 180, dropped their demand that he testify, and instead they used invasive surveillance of Reisen, including his financial records and his internet data and his phone call communications, to identify his alleged source, Jeffrey Sterling. All of that data was gathered from third parties, and Reisen didn't even know it until it was too late. Sterling was ultimately convicted under the Espionage Act and went to prison for providing information to a journalist. So it is clear from this story that we need better legal protections to safeguard journalists like Reisen and their sources from this type of surveillance and prosecution, period. We need legal protections. But while we wait for Congress to act on bills that could fix this problem, there are already technologies that can help. The organization I helped co-found, the Freedom of the Press Foundation, develops and maintains SecureDrop. Originally created by the late Aaron Swartz, SecureDrop allows newsrooms to securely receive documents from sources in a much safer way than phone calls or emails. Sources can go to websites like the Washington Post, the New York Times, and securely upload documents to journalists without disclosing their identity. The journalist can receive those documents securely and even send messages back to the sources to ask additional questions. That way, the journalist never has to know the name of their sources. Like the other tools I've described, it's decentralized, and this fact is actually vital to its protections. Every news organization that sets up SecureDrop has their own self-hosted version. This means that there are no third parties like Google or Verizon for the government to secretly subpoena. And even if the government came to my organization, the Freedom of the Press Foundation, and demanded all the documents that had been submitted over SecureDrop, we wouldn't be able to provide them, because once they is set up in a newsroom, we're locked out. And this highlights another key feature of decentralization, which is independence from its creator. The person who created the original software isn't controlling it later. They aren't able to turn it on or off or tell who is using it or in what ways. Instead, people and organizations set up their own instances of the technology, the version over which they have sovereignty. And this is key to censorship resistance. Through decentralization, we reduce the chances that there is a single entity in power that can be pressured to turn over user data, shutter accounts, or surveil users. So just to wrap up, many of us in this room are very curious about the ways that decentralizing technologies can be used to uplift people and the world. Decentralization stands in sharp contrast to so much of the modern internet, where services are controlled by just a handful of companies who can and do surveil and censor users. And sadly, even in the world of Web3, we see people turning towards centralization. They say, oh, it's easier to host services with an established company. Or they say, oh, it's convenient to let some company handle the code updates or the security or compliance. And there's this ceaseless temptation to move towards centralization and towards corporatization. But here's the thing, and the main thing I want to share with you. We already know what lies down that path. The modern internet has become heavily controlled by just a few companies laden with advertising and surveillance. We are now in a reckoning around the constant incursions on our privacy that are happening every time we interact with Meta, with how Apple takes a massive tariff out of every app on the App Store, with how companies are shoveling data into the hands of law enforcement, even as people are literally on the street protesting over police murders. We know what lies ahead when we turn towards more centralization. And so we are now here because we want to explore ways that technology can advance humanity, justice, and environmental causes. But as we experiment in those directions, let us not recreate the errors of Web 2. Let's not give control to a handful of powerful companies that can dictate and surveil our digital experiences. Instead, let's embrace decentralized technologies that are resilient, that don't have a single point of failure, technologies that everyday people can contribute to with their skills and their code and their computing power, and where the technologies have independence from their creators. Let's commit to developing technologies for justice and liberations that are decentralized. Thank you so much. I will leave you there, and I just want to say, if you want to learn more about FPF's work for journalists, I encourage you to talk to me. Trevor is our executive director. He's right there. He's waving. Or Eric, who's also here from our engineering team. And then I also have a forthcoming book, Transaction Denied, which will be out next year. You cannot get it right now, but you can find out about updates. I have a website, financialcensorship.org, that talks about the project. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the amazing Michelle. Thank you so much for having me.